Bluebeard is a French folktale, the most famous surviving version of which was written by Charles Perrault and first published by Barbin in Paris in January 1659 in Histoires du Contes du temps passé copyright. The tale tells the story of a violent nobleman in the habit of murdering his wives and the attempts of one wife to avoid the fate of her predecessors. The White Dove, Mr. Fox, and Fitcher's Bird are tales similar to Bluebeard. Plot summary: Bluebeard is a wealthy aristocrat, feared and shunned because of his ugly, blue beard. He has been married several times, but no one knows what became of his wives. He is therefore avoided by the local girls. When Bluebeard visits one of his neighbors and asks to marry one of her two daughters, the girls are terrified, and each tries to pass him on to the other. Eventually he talks the younger daughter into visiting him, and after hosting a wonderful banquet, he persuades her to marry him. After the ceremony, she goes to live with him in his car Cento. Very shortly after, Bluebeard announces that he must leave the country for a while. He gives all the keys of the car Cento to his new wife, telling her they open the doors to rooms which contain his treasures. He tells her to use the keys freely and enjoy herself whilst he is away. However, he also gives her the key to one small room beneath the castle, stressing to her that she must not enter this room under any circumstances. She vows she will never enter the room. He then goes away and leaves the house in her hands. Immediately, she is overcome with the desire to see what the forbidden room holds. And, despite warnings from her visiting sister, Anne, the girl abandons her guests during a house party and takes the key to the room. The wife immediately discovers the room's horrible secret: its floor is awash with blood and the murdered bodies of her husband's former wives hang from hooks on the walls. Horrified, she drops the key into the pool of blood. She flees the room, but the blood staining the key will not wash off. She reveals her murderous husband's secret to her sister Anne, and both plan to flee the castle the next day. But, Bluebeard returns home unexpectedly the next morning and, noticing the blood on the key, immediately knows his wife has broken her vow. In a blind rage, he threatens to behead her on the spot, but she implores him to give her a quarter of an hour to say her prayers. He consents, so she locks herself in the highest tower with Anne. While Bluebeard, sword in hand, tries to break down the door, the sisters wait for their two brothers to arrive. At the last moment, as Bluebeard is about to deliver the fatal blow, the brothers break into the castle. And, as he attempts to flee, they kill him. He leaves no heirs but his wife, who inherits all his great fortune. All of Bluebeard's dead wives are buried and she uses part of his fortune for a dowry to marry off her sister, another part for her brother's captain's commissions, and the rest to marry a worthy gentleman who makes her forget her horrible encounter with Bluebeard. Sources: although best known as a folktale, the character of Bluebeard appears to derive from legends related to historical individuals in Brittany. One source is believed to have been the 15th-century Breton nobleman and later self-confessed serial killer Gilles de Rais. However, Gilles de Rais did not kill his wife, nor were any bodies found on his property, and the crimes for which he was convicted involved the motiveless, brutal murder of children and not a punishment for perceived betrayal. Another possible source stems from the story of the early Breton king Connemar the Accursed and his wife Tryphon. This is recorded in a biography of Saint Gildas, written 5 centuries after his death in the 6th century. It describes how after Connemar married Tryphon, she was warned by the ghosts of his previous wives that he murders them when they become pregnant. Pregnant, she flees. He catches and beheads her, but Saint Gildas miraculously restores her to life, and when he brings her to Connemar, the walls of his castle crumble and kill him. Connemar is a historical figure, known locally as a werewolf, and various local churches are dedicated to Saint Tryphon and her son, Saint Tremere. The character's Bluebeard is regarded as a symbol of his otherworldly origins. Commentaries: for Iona and Peter Op, the tale reads as a legend imperfectly recollected. For example, a gap occurs in the narrative between the wife's entrance into the Forbidden Chamber and Bluebeard's unexpected return, a time when her houseguests vanish without explanation, and Bluebeard's willingness to wait a quarter of an hour before slaying his wife is out of character and poorly excused. Although no earlier retelling of the story has been discovered, it may be assumed one existed. The fatal effects of feminine curiosity have long been the subject of story and legend. Lot's wife, Pandora, and Psyche are all examples of mythic stories where women's curiosity is punished by dire consequences. In an illustrated account of the Bluebeard story by Walter Crane, when the wife is shown making her way towards the forbidden room, there is behind her a tapestry of the serpent enticing Eve into eating the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. In addition, hidden or forbidden chambers were not unknown in pre-Perrault literature. In Bazille's Pentamerone, one tale tells of a Princess Marquetta entering a room after being forbidden by an ogress, and in the Arabian Nights Prince Ajib is given 100 keys to 100 doors but forbidden to enter the Golden Door, which he does, with terrible consequences. In the story of Prince Ajib, the motive is clear: the forbidden door is a test. However, in Bluebeard, the motive is less clear. It is not explained why Bluebeard would give a key to his wife that will reveal his horrific marital past. In an Indian story, an ogress looks after a prince while disguised as a beautiful woman and tells him not to enter the tower, pit or kitchen, which will reveal her. In the tower, an old man who has been tied up by her reveals who she is. In the pit are the bones of her victims, and the kitchen contains 3 magical balls which the prince uses to escape the ogress, with the final one a fire is caused which the ogress runs into and burns to death in. Thomson classification: according to the Thomson system of classifying folktale plots, the tale of Bluebeard is type 312. Another such tale is The White Dove, an oral French variant. The type is closely related to Thomson type 311. The heroine rescues herself and her sisters, in such tales as Fitcher's Bird, The Old Dame and Her Hen, and How the Devil Married 3 Sisters. The tales where the youngest daughter rescues herself and the other sisters from the villain is in fact far more common in oral traditions than this type, where the heroine's brother rescues her. Other such tales do exist, however. The brother is sometimes aided in the rescue by marvelous dogs or wild animals. Some European variants of the ballad Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight, Child Ballad 4, closely resemble this tale. This is particularly noteworthy among some German variants, where the heroine calls for help, much like the calls to Sister Anne in Bluebeard, and is rescued by her brother. Bluebeard's wives: it is not known why Bluebeard murdered his first bride. She could not have entered the forbidden room and found a dead wife. In the original 1812 Kinder- und Hausmärchen by the Brothers Grimm, Wilhelm Grimm makes a very interesting handwritten comment in the book on PGXLI of the annotations, it seems in all Märchen of Bluebeard, wherein his Blutdurst, flowing of blood has not rightly explained, the idea to be the basis of himself through bathing in blood to cure of the Bluebeard. As the lepers. That is also why it is written that the blood is collected in basins. Maurice Maeterlinck wrote extensively on Bluebeard and in his plays names at least 5 former wives: Tsar copyright Lisette from Aglavane A Tsar copyright Lisette, Aladdin from Aladdin A Palamides, and both Igraine and Belangari from La Morte de Tintajals, Mar copyright Lysand from Pella copyright A Mar copyright Lysand, and Ariane from Ariane A Barbe. In Offenbach's opera, the 5 previous wives are Har copyright Losay, Ela copyright Honor, Isor, Rosalind and Blanche, with the 6th and final wife being a peasant girl, Boulotte, who finally reveals his secret when he attempts to have her killed so that he can marry Princess Hermia. Bar copyright La Barta cubed K's opera A car copyright KSZ aka La Har copyright RCEG Vara names Judith, which places her as wife number 4, whereas Ariane would be wife number 6, but fails to take Judith into account. Barta cubed K's version does not name any of the wives that appear in it. Anatole France's short story The 7 Wives of Bluebeard names Jeanne as the last wife before Bluebeard's death. Alfred Savoy wrote in the 1920s a play La Huitième Femme de Barbe from which Sam Wood and Ernst Lubitsch produced 2 films. Other than starting from the point of being a +1 wife of Bluebeard and that it considers Anatole France's count of his wives, This play or the films share nothing with a description or numbering of the Duke's wives. In Edward Dmytrykh's film Bluebeard, Baron von Sepper is an Austrian aristocrat known as Bluebeard for his blue-toned beard, and his appetite for beautiful wives. This film names an American beauty named Anne, who discovers a vault in his castle filled with the frozen bodies of his previous wives. Variations. Other versions of Bluebeard include, pantomime versions of the tale were staged at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane in London as early as 1798, and famous editions there were by E. L. Blanchard in 1879 and starred Dan Leno in 1901. Many of these productions orientalized the tale by setting it in the Ottoman Empire, often giving the wife the name Fatima. The popularity of the pantomime made orientalized depictions of Bluebeard common in English illustrations throughout the 19th century and into the early 20th century. Ariane et Barbe by Paul Dukas, Bluebeard's Castle by Bar copyright La Barta Cubed K and Bar copyright La Bala ZS, Bluebeard by the Brothers Grimm, Barbe by Jacques Offenbach, Captain Murderer by Charles Dickens, The Awful History of Bluebeard by William Makepeace Thackeray, Bluebeard's Keys by Anne Thackeray Ritchie, The Seven Wives of Bluebeard by Anatole France, The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, Bluebeard's Egg by Margaret Atwood, Bones by Francesca Leah Bloch. Bluebeard, an off-Broadway comedy by Charles Ludlam, Bluebeard by Kurt Vonnegut, Strands of Bronze and Gold by Jane Nickerson, The Bloody Chamber, the eponymous story of Angela Carter's collection. In Charles Dickens' short story, the titular character is described as an offshoot of the Bluebeard family, and is far more bloodthirsty than most Bluebeards. He cannibalizes each wife a month after marriage. He meets his demise after his sister-in-law in revenge for the death of her sister, marries him and consumes a deadly poison just before he devours her. In DC Comics' Fables series, Bluebeard appears as an immoral character, willing to kill and often suspected of being involved in various nefarious deeds. Bluebeard is also a character in the video game by Telltale Games based on the Fables comics, The Wolf Among Us. In the Japanese light novel and recently adapted manga anime Fate Zero, Bluebeard appears as the caster servant, where his character largely stems from Galister Ray's as a serial murderer of children. Bluebeard appears as a minor Dark Lord in the advanced Dungeons & Dragons Ravenloft accessory Dark Lords. In Stephen King's The Shining, the story of Bluebeard is read by Jack to Danny as a 3-year-old, to his wife's disapproval. In television, Bluebeard is featured in Grimm's fairy tale classics as part of its Grimm Masterpiece Theatre season. The character Bluebeard is also featured as one of 7 servants in the 2011 anime Fate Zero. The Ice King character from Adventure Time series seems to be inspired by Bluebeard tale. Bluebeard is featured in the fairy tale detective Sandra as the villain in the episode The Forbidden Room. In other media, Bluebeard featured as a villain in the comic series Fables. Bluebeard also featured in The Wolf Among Us, a game based around Fables. He is voiced by Dave Fennoy. Bluebeard is mentioned in Blackberry Picking, a poem by Seamus Heaney. Bluebeard is the title of and inspiration for a song by the Coteau Twins. It was included on their 1993 album For Calendar Cafar copyright. In film, several film versions of the story exist. Barbe, a short film by Georges Marr copyright Leah S. Bluebeard, a film by the cult director Edgar G. Ulmer, starring John Carradine. Secret Beyond the Door. A 1948 contemporary adaptation by director Fritz Lang and produced by Walter Wanger, with Michael Redgrave making his Hollywood debut in the Bluebeard-inspired role and Wanger's wife Joan Bennett as Redgrave's new bride. Bluebeard, released in the United States as Bluebeard, a 1951 German-French film directed by Christian Jake, starring Hans Albers. Bluebeard, a film directed by Edward Dmytryk, starring Richard Burton. The French film Barbe, directed by Catherine Breillat, is modeled closely on the work by Charles Perrault. Monsieur Verdoux is a 1947 black comedy film directed by and starring Charles Chaplin. The Piano, a 1993 film directed by Jane Campion. The film also serves as a retelling of the fairy tale Bluebeard, which is hinted at further in the inclusion of Bluebeard as a piece of the Christmas pageant. References. Further reading: Hermanson, Cassie Lee. Bluebeard, A Reader's Guide to the English Tradition. Jackson, Mississippi, University Press of Mississippi. Lew, Oliver. The Original 1812 Grimm Fairy Tales Kinder- und Hausmärchen Children's and Household Tales, external links, Edwin Sidney Hartland. The Forbidden Chamber. The Folklore Journal. Volume 3, 1885. Legendary Scottish Bluebeard. Sir John Cathcart, Sur la Lune Fairy Tale Pages, Heidi Ann Heine, The Annotated Bluebeard, Variants, Bluebeard and the Bloody Chamber by Terry Windling, Leon Botstein's Concert Notes on Durkheim's Ariane et Barbe bleue, Glimmerglass Opera's Notes on Offenbach's Barbe bleue, The Bluebeard Fairy Tale in General, and Operetta in the Time of Offenbach. A Shakespeare Reference, French, Bluebeard, audio version, translation of the German version of the fairy tale Night Bluebeard by Ludwig Bechstein, game about Bluebeard, Bluebeard at the Iroquois Theatre.